Sometimes the richest children are the poorest of all. Sometimes the person who saves you is the one you never thought to notice. Harper Langston has everything a 17-year-old could want, except her father's attention and her mother's time. The billionaire's daughter sits alone in summer school again, collecting failures like her parents collect awards. Down the hall, Elijah Carter quietly mops floors and empties trash cans. At 63, this widowed janitor raised 3 kids on his own while working 2 jobs. When Harper's latest crisis lands her in detention, she meets the man who will change everything. Elijah sees something in this lost girl that her family missed. He offers her something money can't buy, someone who cares enough to help her start from nothing. But can a poor man's wisdom reach a rich girl's heart? Before we jump back in, and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Langston estate, casting long shadows across marble floors that cost more than most people's homes. Harper Langston sat at the end of a dining table built for 12, picking at eggs Benedict, prepared by a chef who'd trained in Paris. The silence stretched between her and the empty chairs where her parents should have been sitting. Her father, Marcus, was already on his 3rd conference call of the day from his home office, his voice carrying through the walls as he negotiated another multi-million-dollar acquisition. Her mother, Victoria, had left for Manhattan before dawn. Something about a charity board meeting that would likely last until evening cocktails. Harper pushed the food around her plate, remembering when she was 8 and her parents still ate breakfast together. Before the divorce, before the remarriage, before the empire grew so large it consumed everything in its path, including family meals and bedtime stories. "Miss Harper," came the gentle voice of Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who'd raised her more than her own parents. "Your driver will be here in 20 minutes. Summer school. Again." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. Millbrook Academy sat nestled in the rolling hills of Connecticut, its brick buildings and manicured lawns speaking of old money and older traditions. Founded in 1887, it had educated the children of senators and oil barons, tech moguls, and pharmaceutical heirs. The tuition alone could buy a house in most American cities. Harper's Mercedes pulled through the iron gates at exactly 7:45 a.m., same as every weekday for the past 3 years. The same route, the same schedule, the same feeling of dread settling in her stomach like stones. Inside those hallowed halls, beneath oil portraits of distinguished alumni, Harper had managed to fail spectacularly at everything that should have come naturally to someone with her advantages. Advanced placement history, D-, college preparatory mathematics, F, even creative writing, which should have been easy for someone who spent most of her time daydreaming, had become another disappointment. The irony wasn't lost on her that, while her father built algorithms that could predict market fluctuations with stunning accuracy, his own daughter couldn't solve for X in the simplest equation. Down the hall from Harper's usual spot in remedial mathematics, Elijah Carter began his day as he had for the past 7 years. He arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, before the first student or teacher set foot on campus. His weathered hands unlocked the janitor's closet, a small space that served as his office, his sanctuary, and sometimes his chapel. On the shelf above his cleaning supplies sat a worn leather Bible, its pages soft from years of turning, margins filled with handwritten notes in careful script. Next to it, a thermos of coffee that would last him until lunch, and a small frame photograph of 3 smiling faces at various graduation ceremonies. His children, all grown now, all successful, all products of his patient love and unwavering faith. Dr. Marcus Carter, the eldest, worked at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Sarah taught 3rd grade in Baltimore, named after his late wife who'd passed when the children were still young. James, the youngest, had just graduated from law school and started at a firm in Washington, D.C. Elijah had raised them in a two-bedroom apartment above a corner store, working days at the school and evenings at a warehouse. While their classmates' parents helped with homework at kitchen tables, Elijah tutored his children by the light of a single lamp, his strong voice reading aloud from library books when the electricity got cut off. He'd never missed a parent-teacher conference, never failed to attend a school play or science fair, never let his children believe that their circumstances defined their possibilities. When Sarah struggled with fractions, he taught her using pizza slices. When Marcus worried he wasn't smart enough for medical school, Elijah reminded him that intelligence wasn't about being the fastest, it was about being the most persistent. Now, pushing his cart down the gleaming hallways of Millbrook Academy, Elijah observed a different kind of struggle. These children had every advantage money could provide: tutors, technology, travel, opportunity, yet many of them seemed just as lost as any kid he'd ever known. He noticed things others missed: the way certain students ate lunch alone, despite being surrounded by peers; how some of the brightest kids in school seemed to carry the heaviest burdens; the girl who cried in the bathroom stall every Tuesday after chemistry class; the boy who threw away sandwiches his nanny packed because he was too embarrassed to admit he was hungry. And then there was Harper Langston. Elijah had watched her for 3 years. This girl who had everything and nothing at once. He'd seen her sit in the back of classrooms, staring out windows, while teachers droned on about subjects that should have fascinated someone with her quick mind. He'd witnessed her fake sick to avoid presentations, watched her crumple test papers and throw them away unread. But more than that, he'd seen her kindness. The way she helped a wheelchair-bound student navigate the stairs when everyone else rushed past. How she'd quietly slip her own lunch money to a scholarship kid whose parents couldn't afford the cafeteria fees. The tears she tried to hide when she thought no one was looking. Harper reminded him of a plant he'd once found in his late wife's garden, wilted and brown, ignored by everyone who assumed it was dead. Sarah had wanted to throw it away, but Elijah had insisted on giving it water, sunlight and time. 6 months later, it bloomed more beautifully than any flower in the yard. The first time Elijah and Harper had truly seen each other was on a rainy Tuesday in March. She'd been rushing to make up yet another test she'd missed, arms full of books, when she'd slipped on the freshly mopped floor. Papers scattered everywhere, mixing with the damp from her shoes and the embarrassment burning in her cheeks. Most adults would have scolded her for not watching where she was going. Most students would have laughed. Elijah had simply knelt beside her, gathering her assignments with careful hands, and said quietly, "Everybody falls sometimes, miss. The important thing is getting back up with more wisdom than you had going down." She'd looked at him then, really looked, perhaps for the first time, not at his uniform or his mop bucket, but at his eyes, which held a warmth she hadn't felt from an adult in longer than she could remember. "Thank you," she'd whispered, and meant it more than any thank you she'd ever spoken. Now, 3 months later, as summer school loomed and Harper faced the very real possibility of not graduating with her class, that brief moment of connection felt like a lifetime ago. She sat in Mrs. Davidson's office, staring at a report card that read like a catalogue of failures, while the guidance counselor spoke in the careful tones reserved for delivering bad news to rich parents. "Harper, I've spoken with your father extensively about your academic performance," Mrs. Davidson said, her voice carrying 30 years of experience dealing with underachieving students. "He's made it very clear that if your grades don't improve significantly this summer, alternative educational arrangements will need to be made." Alternative arrangements. Harper knew exactly what that meant. Military school, boarding school, anywhere but here, where she'd become an embarrassment to the Langston name. "I've tried everything," Harper said, the words coming out smaller than she intended. "Tutors, study groups, medication for attention deficit, nothing works." Mrs. Davidson leaned forward, her expression softening. "Harper, I don't think you're..." problem is academic ability. Your standardized test scores suggest you're quite capable. I think your problem might be that you've never learned how to learn." The words hung in the air like a challenge Harper didn't understand how to meet. "What do you mean? You've had every advantage. The best tutors, the most advanced technology, parents who could buy you any educational opportunity in the world. But sometimes what a person needs isn't more resources. Sometimes they need someone who simply cares, enough to help them discover they're capable of more than they believe." Harper felt something stir in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, though she'd learned not to trust that particular emotion. "Is that possible for someone like me?" Mrs. Davidson smiled. "Harper, I've been doing this for 3 decades. I've seen kids from the worst circumstances imaginable go on to achieve incredible things, and I've seen kids with every advantage in the world waste opportunities that others would die for. The difference is never about money or resources. It's about having someone believe in you enough to help you believe in yourself." As Harper left the guidance office, those words echoed in her mind. Someone who cares enough to help them discover they're capable of more than they believe. She thought about the janitor who'd helped her pick up her papers, whose eyes had held more warmth than her own father's boardroom smile. She thought about how, in her 17 years of private schools and expensive tutors, no one had ever made her feel like she was worth the effort it would take to truly help her learn. Maybe it was time to change that. The algebra test sat on Harper's desk like an accusation written in red ink. 43%. Even after 3 hours with her latest tutor, a Harvard graduate student who charged $200 an hour, she'd managed to fail spectacularly. Mrs. Peterson, the summer school mathematics teacher, had written a note at the bottom in her precise handwriting. "Harper, this level of performance suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of basic concepts. Please see me after class to discuss remedial options." Remedial options. The words burned worse than the F itself. Harper crumpled the test paper, then smoothed it out again, staring at the problems she'd gotten wrong. They weren't even the hard ones. Basic linear equations, simple word problems about calculating. Distances and speeds. Math that 8th graders should master without breaking a sweat. The worst part wasn't the failing grade. The worst part was that she'd actually tried this time, really tried. She'd read the chapters twice, worked through practice problems, even attended the optional study sessions. And still, when she sat for the test, her mind had gone blank, filled with nothing but the familiar fog of confusion and the growing certainty that she was simply too stupid to understand. The classroom emptied around her as other students packed up their belongings and headed to their next period. Harper remained frozen in her seat, the test paper trembling in her hands. Through the window, she could see the manicured grounds of Millbrook Academy, perfectly trimmed hedges, flower beds arranged in geometric patterns, a fountain that had been donated by some alumnus whose great-grandfather had invented something important. Everything here was perfect. Everything except her. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "Heard about the test. We need to talk tonight." Harper's stomach dropped. Her father didn't need to talk unless something serious was happening. The last time he'd used those words, he'd announced he was sending her to boarding school in Switzerland. Only her mother's intervention had kept her in Connecticut, though Harper sometimes wondered if exile might have been preferable to the constant disappointment in her father's eyes. She gathered her books and walked toward the door, but stopped when she heard Mrs. Peterson call her name. "Harper, could you stay a moment, please?" The teacher's voice carried the kind of weary patience that came from dealing with struggling students year after year. Harper had heard that tone before from dozens of instructors, guidance counselors, and educational specialists. It was the sound of someone trying very hard to care about a lost cause. "I know this is frustrating," Mrs. Peterson said, settling into the chair beside Harper's desk. "But I want you to know that struggling with mathematics doesn't mean you're not intelligent. Sometimes bright students have the hardest time because they've never learned how to work through confusion. Harper looked down at her hands. I've had tutors since I was 10, really good ones, expensive ones. If I can't learn from them, maybe I just can't learn. Harper, may I ask you something personal? Mrs. Peterson waited until Harper nodded. When you're working with these tutors, do they teach you how to think through problems, or do they just show you the steps to get the right answer? The question caught Harper off guard. She thought about her sessions with Dr. Martinez, her most recent tutor. He would work through sample problems on the whiteboard, explaining each step clearly and efficiently. Then he'd assign her similar problems to complete, growing frustrated when she couldn't replicate his process. They show me how to do it, Harper admitted. Then they expect me to do it the same way. And when you can't, they show me again. Slower, like I'm stupid. Mrs. Peterson nodded knowingly. Harper, there's a difference between being taught the answer and learning how to find it yourself. You've been given a lot of answers, but no one's ever taught you how to think. The words hit Harper with unexpected force. She'd always assumed her struggles meant she lacked some essential intelligence that came naturally to other students. But what if the problem wasn't her capacity to learn? What if it was that no one had ever actually taught her how? Is it too late? Harper asked quietly. To learn how to think, I mean. It's never too late, Mrs. Peterson said firmly. But it requires something different than what you've been doing. It requires someone who has the patience to let you struggle through problems instead of just giving you solutions. Someone who understands that learning happens slowly through mistakes and confusion and small victories. Harper felt tears building behind her eyes. I don't think my parents understand that. They just see the grades and think I'm not trying hard enough. Sometimes parents who are very successful themselves have trouble understanding why their children struggle. They think success should be easy because it came easily to them. Mrs. Peterson paused, choosing her words carefully. Harper, what you need isn't another expensive tutor. What you need is someone who believes you're worth the slow, patient work of real learning. As Harper left the classroom, Mrs. Peterson's words echoed in her mind. Someone who believes you're worth the slow, patient work of real learning. She'd heard similar words just yesterday from Mrs. Davidson, but where would she find such a person? The hallways of Millbrook Academy were nearly empty as Harper made her way to her locker. Most students had gone home or to extracurricular activities. The silence felt oppressive, filled with the weight of her latest failure and the dreaded conversation with her father that awaited her. She was fumbling with her combination lock, her hands shaking from stress, when she heard the gentle squeak of wheels on marble floors. Elijah Carter was making his afternoon rounds, his cleaning cart loaded with supplies, his movements unhurried and methodical. He nodded to her as he passed, the same respectful acknowledgement he'd given her every day for 3 years. But today, Harper found herself really seeing him, not his uniform or his job, but something deeper. There was a calmness about him, a sense of purpose in his work that she'd never noticed before. As she watched him clean the water fountain with careful attention, Harper remembered Mrs. Peterson's words about patience and slow learning. She thought about the way Elijah had helped her with her papers that day in March, his gentle words about falling and getting back up with wisdom. An idea began to form in her mind, tentative, probably crazy, but persistent nonetheless. She closed her locker and walked over to where Elijah was working. He looked up when she approached, his weathered face kind but curious. "Mr. Carter," she said, then realized she didn't actually know his first name. "I'm sorry, I don't know what to call you." "Elijah's fine, miss," he said, setting down his cleaning cloth. "Everything all right? You look troubled." The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly undid her. When was the last time an adult had asked if she was all right and actually waited for an answer? "I'm failing," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Everything. Math, history, even English, and I don't know how to stop failing." Elijah studied her face for a moment, and Harper had the unsettling feeling that he saw straight through all her walls and defenses. "Failing's not the same as being a failure," he said quietly. "Sometimes we have to fail at the wrong things before we can succeed at the right ones." Harper felt tears spring to her eyes again. "Everyone thinks I'm stupid. My parents, my teachers, probably you too." "Miss Harper," Elijah said, his voice gentle but firm, "I've been watching you for 3 years. I've seen how you treat the students, who have less than you do. I've seen your kindness when you think nobody's looking. Intelligence isn't just about grades and test scores. It's about understanding what matters." The tears came then, flowing freely down Harper's cheeks. She'd held them back for so long, through disappointed parent-teacher conferences, through sessions with educational specialists, through the constant pressure to live up to expectations she couldn't understand how to meet. "I'm supposed to have a conversation with my father tonight," she said through her tears, "about alternative educational arrangements." Elijah's expression darkened slightly. "What kind of alternatives? Military school? Or boarding school? Somewhere. I can't embarrass the family name anymore." "And what do you want, Miss Harper?" The question stopped her crying. What did she want? She'd been so focused on avoiding her parents' disappointment, on trying to meet other people's expectations, that she'd never really considered what she actually wanted for herself. "I want to learn," she said finally. "I want to understand why. Everyone else can solve these problems, and I can't. I want to feel like I'm not stupid." Elijah nodded slowly. "Learning's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being willing to work at understanding, even when it's hard, even when it's slow. Will you help me?" The words came out in a rush, surprising Harper as much as they seemed to surprise Elijah. "I know you're not a teacher, and I know it's not your job, but everyone keeps saying I need someone who's patient, someone who cares enough to help me learn how to learn. And you're the only person who's ever talked to me like I might actually be worth the effort." Elijah was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching Harper's face. "Miss Harper, helping you with your studies wouldn't be proper. I'm the janitor here, and you're a student. There are boundaries." "Please," Harper interrupted, "I'll pay you, whatever you want. I can't keep failing. I can't go to military school. This is my last chance." "This isn't about money," Elijah said firmly. "And it's not about last chances either. This is about you deciding you're worth the hard work of learning, even when it's difficult." Harper wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Does that mean you'll help me?" Elijah sighed, but Harper caught the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. "I suppose I could spare some time during my lunch breaks, but if we do this, we do it right. No shortcuts, no easy answers. You'll have to be willing to work harder than you've ever worked before." For the first time in months, Harper felt something. That might have been hope. "I'm willing," she said. "When do we start?" Harper arrived at school the next morning 15 minutes early, her stomach churning with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She'd barely slept, replaying her conversation with Elijah and dreading the upcoming talk with her father that she'd managed to postpone until tonight. She found Elijah in the janitor's closet he'd mentioned, a surprisingly organized space tucked beneath the main staircase. He'd set up 2 folding chairs around a small table made from a piece of plywood, balanced on storage boxes. The harsh fluorescent bulb overhead had been replaced with a warmer lamp that cast a gentle glow over their makeshift classroom. "Morning, Miss Harper," Elijah said, looking up from the notebook where he'd been writing. "Ready to get started?" Harper hesitated in the doorway. The space was so different from the marble-columned rooms where she usually received tutoring. No whiteboard, no expensive educational software, no stack of prep books that cost more than most people spent on groceries. Just 2 chairs, a simple table, and Elijah's worn lunchbox sitting on a shelf beside his thermos. "This is where we're going to study?" she asked, trying to keep the doubt out of her voice. "Sometimes the best learning happens in the humblest places," Elijah replied. "My children did most of their homework at a kitchen table smaller than this one. What matters isn't the space, it's the intention you bring to it." Harper took the seat across from him and pulled out her algebra textbook, the same one that had confounded her for months. Elijah glanced at it and shook his head. "We're not starting there," he said, closing the book gently. "First, we need to understand why you think you can't learn." "What do you mean?" "Miss Harper, in my experience, people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because somewhere along the way they convinced themselves they were. So before we tackle any equations, we need to tackle that belief." Elijah opened his notebook and showed her a page filled with simple arithmetic problems. Addition, subtraction, basic multiplication, elementary school math. Harper felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Mr. Elijah, I can do this stuff. I'm not a child." "I know you're not," he said patiently, "but humor an old man. Show me how you solve this one." He pointed to a problem. 47 plus 38. Harper stared at the numbers, feeling suddenly uncertain despite the problem's simplicity. In her head, she tried to apply the complex strategies her tutors had taught her for more advanced problems. She drew blanks, searched for formulas, grew frustrated when she couldn't remember the proper method. I can't remember the technique," she stammered. "What technique?" "The one for addition. My tutor showed me a special method." Elijah held up a gentle hand. "Miss Harper, there's no special technique for this. You've been adding numbers since you were 6 years old. Trust what you know. But what if I do it wrong? Then we'll figure out why and fix it. That's how learning works." Harper took a shaky breath and wrote down her answer. 85. Elijah smiled. "Now show me how you got that." I added them. 40 plus 30 is 70, 7 plus 8 is 15, so 70 plus 15 is 85. Exactly right. You see, you do know how to think through problems. You've just been taught to doubt yourself. For the next hour, Elijah walked Harper through increasingly complex problems, but never let her reach for a textbook or formula sheet. When she got stuck, instead of showing her the answer, he asked questions that helped her think through the solution herself. "What do you know about this problem? What are they asking you to find? What information do they give you? If you were explaining this to a friend, how would you break it down?" It was slow work, often frustrating, but gradually Harper began to see something she'd never noticed before. She actually did understand more than she thought. The fog of confusion that usually descended when she looked at math problems began to clear, replaced by a tentative confidence. "Time for a break," Elijah said, checking his watch. "You've been thinking hard for an hour. That's enough for today." "But we barely covered anything," Harper protested. "My tutors usually work through 20 or 30 problems in an hour. And how much did you remember the next day?" Harper fell silent. The honest answer was almost nothing. She'd memorized the steps long enough to complete assignments, then forget everything by the next session. "Learning isn't about covering ground quickly," Elijah said, packing away their materials. "It's about understanding deeply. Better to truly master 5 problems than to memorize the steps for 50. As Harper gathered her things, she noticed the dented metal lunchbox on Elijah's shelf. Unlike the expensive bento boxes and designer lunch bags she was used to seeing, this one looked like it had been through decades of use. "That's an interesting lunchbox," she said. Elijah smiled, a warmth entering his eyes. "Had it since 1982. My late wife, Sarah, she packed my lunch in it every day for 23 years. After she passed, I kept using it. Reminds me that the most valuable things in life aren't always the prettiest or most expensive." Harper thought about her own lunches, catered meals from high-end restaurants, or protein bars that cost $12 each. They filled her stomach, but she'd never thought of them as carrying love. What kind of sandwiches did she make? Peanut butter and jelly, mostly. Sometimes bologna and cheese if we were feeling fancy. Elijah chuckled. "My children used to complain that other kids had more exotic lunches. Sushi, organic this, gluten-free that. But Sarah would tell them, it's not what's in the sandwich that matters. It's the love that made it." Harper felt an unexpected pang of longing. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her a sandwich, let alone with love. As she Walked to her next class. Harper's mind wasn't on the upcoming quiz or the conversation with her father she was dreading. Instead, she found herself thinking about Elijah's patient questions, the way he'd helped her rediscover confidence in her own thinking. For the first time in years, she'd spent an hour learning without feeling stupid. It was a small victory, but it felt significant in a way she couldn't quite explain. In the cafeteria at lunch, Harper sat with her usual group, daughters and sons of CEOs, senators, and entertainment moguls. The conversation flowed around her, as it always did, touching on summer plans in the Hamptons, new cars for 18th birthdays, college applications to Ivy League schools their parents had attended. "Harper, you're being unusually quiet," said Madison Westbrook, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels. "Still stressed about summer school?" Harper looked around the table at faces she'd known for years but never really connected with. They were kind enough in their way, but their concerns felt foreign to her now, like echoes from a life she was slowly outgrowing. "I'm fine," she said simply. "Just thinking about some things I'm learning." "Well, don't think too hard," laughed Trevor Morrison, whose father was running for Senate. "Summer's supposed to be easy time." As her friends returned to their conversation about yacht clubs and tennis tournaments, Harper found herself wondering what Elijah was doing for lunch. Was he eating alone in his small closet? Or did he have friends among the maintenance staff? Did he read while he ate, or simply enjoy a few moments of quiet in his busy day? She realized she was curious about his life, in a way she'd never been curious about anyone's before. Not because he was exotic or mysterious, but because there was something authentic about him that made her want to understand how someone could find such contentment in a simple existence. The afternoon passed slowly. Harper struggled through her regular classes, but found herself approaching problems differently. Instead of immediately panicking when she didn't know an answer, she tried to apply Elijah's patient questioning method to her own thinking. What do I know? What are they asking? How can I break this down? It didn't work every time, and she still made plenty of mistakes, but the crushing sense of stupidity that usually accompanied confusion was slightly less oppressive. After her last class, Harper walked past the janitor's closet and saw that Elijah was already gone for the day. She felt a small disappointment, realizing she'd been looking forward to seeing him again, maybe continuing their conversation. On the drive home, Harper stared out the window at the Connecticut countryside rolling past. Stone walls built by farmers centuries ago, trees that had witnessed the birth and death of generations, houses that had sheltered families through wars and peace and the countless small dramas of everyday life. For the first time, she found herself wondering about the people who had lived in those houses, worked those fields, built those walls with their own hands. What had they learned? How had they passed their knowledge to their children? What wisdom had died with them and what had survived? The Langston estate came into view, all glass and steel and architectural ambition, a monument to her father's. Success that somehow felt less impressive than it had that morning. Harper realized she was dreading going inside, not because of the conversation with her father, but because the house suddenly felt hollow in a way it never had before. As the car pulled into the circular driveway, Harper made a decision. Tomorrow, she would ask Elijah about his children, not just their successes, but how he'd taught them to believe in themselves. She wanted to understand how love could be packed into a lunchbox, how wisdom could be passed from one generation to the next without expensive tutors or advanced degrees. She wanted to learn not just how to solve for X, but how to solve for the person she was meant to become. The conversation with her father had gone better than Harper expected, though that wasn't saying much. Marcus Langston had listened to her explanation about finding a study partner. She'd been careful not to mention that her partner was the school janitor, and agreed to postpone any decisions about alternative schools until the end of summer session. "I'm giving you 8 weeks, Harper," he'd said from behind his mahogany desk, barely looking up from his laptop. 8 weeks to prove you can turn this around. If I don't see dramatic improvement, we're having a different conversation in September." 8 weeks felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Now, sitting across from Elijah in their makeshift classroom, Harper felt the weight of that timeline pressing down on her shoulders. She'd managed to complete the practice problems he'd assigned the day before, but barely. "You're thinking too hard again," Elijah observed, watching her struggle. "With a word problem about calculating the time needed to fill a swimming pool. What's the first thing this problem tells you?" Harper read the question again, her mind immediately jumping to complex formulas she half remembered from her tutoring sessions. "I need to find the rate of—" "Stop," Elijah said gently. "Don't worry about rates or formulas. Just tell me what's happening in this problem, like you're telling a story." Harper took a breath and tried to see past the numbers to the actual situation. "There's a pool and a hose. The hose puts water in at a certain speed, and they want to know how long it takes to fill it up." "Exactly. So, what do you need to know to figure that out? How fast the water goes in, and how big the pool is. And do they give you that information?" Harper scanned the problem again. "Yes. The hose fills it at 50 gallons per minute, and the pool holds 3,000 gallons. So, if you put 50 gallons in every minute, how many minutes will it take to put in 3,000 gallons? Harper felt the solution click into place with startling clarity. 60 minutes, 3,000 divided by 50. There you go. You solved it by understanding what was actually happening, not by memorizing formulas. It was such a simple approach, yet Harper had never experienced anything like it in years of expensive tutoring. Her previous instructors had always started with formulas and techniques, teaching her to recognize problem types and apply predetermined methods. Elijah started with comprehension. "Can I ask you something personal?" Harper said as she worked. "Through the next problem, sure. How did you learn to teach like this? Did you go to school for education?" Elijah chuckled. "I never went to college at all. Finished high school and went straight to work to support my family. Everything I know about helping people learn, I learned from raising my children." Harper paused in her work. She'd assumed that effective teaching required advanced degrees and specialized training. The idea that the most helpful instruction she'd ever received came from someone with no formal pedagogical background was both surprising and somehow comforting. "And what was it like, raising 3 kids on your own?" Elijah's expression grew thoughtful. "Hard, especially after Sarah died. Marcus was only 12, Sarah Jr. was 10, and James was 8. They were scared, confused, angry at the world for taking their mama away." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn photograph, 3 children in their Sunday best, standing in front of a small apartment building. Even in the faded image, Harper could see the love and pride in their young faces. The hardest part wasn't the practical stuff, the cooking, the laundry, the homework help. It was helping them believe they could still have good lives even though they'd lost so much. "How did you do that?" "Same way I'm helping you now. One day at a time, one problem at a time. When Marcus said he wanted to be a doctor but didn't think he was smart enough, I didn't lecture him about believing in himself. I just helped him with his biology homework every night until he started getting A's. When Sarah was afraid to read out loud because kids made fun of her accent, we practiced together until she felt confident." Harper studied the photograph, trying to imagine Elijah as a young, single father, working multiple jobs while helping his children navigate their grief and their dreams. "They all turned out so successful," she said. "You must be proud." "I'm proud that they're good people," Elijah said simply. "The success came later. First, they had to learn how to be kind, how to work hard, how to treat others with respect. The rest followed naturally." Harper thought about her own upbringing, surrounded by people who measured worth primarily through achievement and accumulation. "Do you think I can learn those things too? At 17, I mean. Maybe it's too late." Elijah's smile was warm and certain. "Miss Harper, it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." My Sarah didn't start believing in herself until she was in college. James struggled with confidence well into his 20s. Growing into yourself isn't about age. It's about being ready to do the work. What kind of work? The hardest kind. Learning to be patient with yourself while still pushing yourself to grow. Learning to find your worth in who you are, not just what you accomplish. As if to prove his point, Harper's next math problem completely stumped her. She stared at it for 10 minutes, growing increasingly frustrated as her mind went blank. "I can't figure this one out," she said finally, her voice tight with familiar frustration. In the past, this would have been the moment where Harper gave up, convinced once again of her fundamental inadequacy. But Elijah's response was different from any teacher she'd ever had. "Good," he said, making a note in his notebook. "This is where real learning starts. Good? I just failed to solve the problem. You worked at it for 10 minutes without giving up. That's longer than you would have tried a week ago. And now we know exactly where your understanding breaks down, which means we know what to work on next." Elijah pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began drawing simple diagrams, breaking the complex problem into smaller, more manageable pieces. Instead of making Harper feel stupid for not understanding, he treated her confusion as valuable information. "Learning happens in the confusion," he explained as they worked through the problem step by step. "If everything was easy, you wouldn't be growing. The struggle is how your brain builds new pathways." By the end of their session, Harper had not only solved the problem that had initially defeated her, but understood the underlying concept well enough to tackle similar ones. More importantly, she'd experienced something she'd never felt before. In academic settings, the satisfaction of genuine understanding earned through effort. "Same time tomorrow?" Elijah asked as they packed up their materials. "Absolutely," Harper replied, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. As the days passed, Harper found herself looking forward to their lunch sessions with an anticipation that surprised her. It wasn't just the academic progress, though her confidence with mathematical concepts was growing steadily. It was the feeling of being truly seen and valued by an adult who expected nothing from her except honest effort. Elijah had a way of making their small closet classroom feel like the most important place in the world. He listened when she talked about her frustrations, celebrated her small victories as if they were major achievements, and never made her feel rushed or pressured to perform beyond her current ability. One day, as they worked through a particularly challenging set of problems, Harper found herself opening up about her home life in ways she'd never done with anyone. "My parents weren't always like this," she said during a break, watching Elijah pour coffee from his thermos. "When I was little, before the divorce, we used to do things together. My dad taught me to ride a bike. My mom read me bedtime stories." "What changed?" Harper considered the question carefully. "I think they got busy building an empire and forgot they were supposed to be building a family too. And then, when I started struggling in school, I became another problem to solve instead of a daughter to love." Elijah nodded knowingly. Success can be intoxicating. It makes people feel like they have control over everything, including other people's lives. When those people don't respond the way they expect, it's confusing and frustrating. "Do you think they love me?" "I think they love who they want you to be," Elijah said gently. "The question is whether you're ready to love who you actually are." Harper felt tears prick her eyes. "What if who I actually am isn't good enough?" "Miss Harper, in my 63 years on this earth, I've learned something important. Every person is born with unique gifts and a unique purpose. Your job isn't to be good enough for someone else's vision. Your job is to discover what you're meant to contribute to this world. How do I do that? You start by paying attention to what matters to you. What makes you come alive? What problems do you care about solving? What kind of person do you want to be when no one's watching? These were questions Harper had never considered seriously, Her entire life had been structured around meeting other people's expectations, preparing for a future that others had designed for her. The idea that she might have her own dreams and values to discover felt both terrifying and liberating. That afternoon, walking through the hallways of Millbrook Academy, Harper found herself seeing the school differently. Instead of just noticing the wealthy students and expensive fixtures, she began to observe the people who kept the place running, the cafeteria workers, the groundskeepers, the administrative staff. She realized she'd been living in a bubble within a bubble, aware only of the small circle of privilege that surrounded her. But there was a whole world of people with their own stories, struggles, and wisdom, if she just took the time to notice. During lunch with her usual group of friends, Harper found herself growing impatient with their conversation about designer, handbags, and exclusive vacation destinations. When Madison complained about her parents buying her a BMW instead of the Mercedes she'd requested for her birthday, Harper felt a flare of irritation she'd never experienced before. "Maybe be grateful you have a car at all," Harper said before she could stop herself. The table went quiet. Madison looked genuinely shocked. "Harper, are you feeling okay? You've been acting weird lately." Harper looked around at the faces of her friends, people she'd known for years, but suddenly felt she hardly understood. They weren't bad people, she realized. They were just trapped in the same bubble she'd been living in, unable to see beyond the narrow confines of their privileged world. "I'm fine," she said quietly, "just thinking about things differently these days." After school, Harper found herself walking toward Elijah's closet classroom, even though they didn't have a session scheduled. She wanted to tell him about her growing awareness of the world beyond her privilege, to share her confusion about her changing perspective on her friends and her life. She knocked softly on the doorframe and found Elijah organizing supplies for the next day's cleaning rounds. "Miss Harper," he said with a smile, "this is a pleasant surprise. Everything all right?" "I think I'm starting to see things differently," she said, settling into her usual chair, "and it's making me feel disconnected from everyone I used to relate to." Elijah set down his supplies and gave her his full attention. Growing up often means growing apart from some people. It's not that they're bad or you're better, you're just moving in different directions. Is that what happened to you when you were raising your children? In some ways, I had friends who couldn't understand why I spent my evenings helping with homework instead of watching television or going out. They thought I was being too serious, too focused on things that didn't matter. Elijah paused. But I knew what mattered to me. My children's futures mattered more than my social life. Harper nodded, feeling a recognition of something she couldn't quite name. "I think I'm starting to figure out what matters to me, too, and it's not what I thought it would be." "That's the beginning of wisdom," Elijah said, "understanding that your values don't have to match everyone else's expectations." As Harper walked to her car that evening, she carried with her not just improved mathematical skills, but a growing sense of her own identity, separate from her family's wealth and her classmates' assumptions. It was uncomfortable and uncertain, but also exciting in a way she'd never experienced. For the first time in her life, she was beginning to understand who she might become if she had the courage to choose her own path. 3 weeks into their tutoring arrangement, Harper passed her first test in over a year. Not just passed, she earned a solid B, her work showing clear understanding rather than lucky guesses or memorized formulas. Mrs. Peterson had written a note at the bottom. "Harper, this demonstrates real comprehension. Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up." Harper stared at the test paper during lunch, hardly believing the grade was real. She'd worked through every problem methodically, using Elijah's patient questioning approach, and for the first time in her academic career, her answers had made sense to her even as she wrote them down. She couldn't wait to show Elijah. "Well, look at that," he said when she practically burst into their makeshift classroom, test paper in hand. "How does it feel to succeed at something you earned?" Harper paused, considering the question seriously. "Different than I expected. I Thought it would feel like relief, but it doesn't. It feels like I want to do it again. Elijah's smile was radiant. That's the difference between real learning and performing for others. When you truly understand something, it makes you hungry to understand more. Is that why your children all did so well in school? Because you taught them to be hungry for learning? Partly, but mostly because I taught them that their worth wasn't tied to their grades. When you know you're valued regardless of your performance, you're free to take the risks that real learning requires. Harper thought about that as they worked through new problems together. For years, every test grade had felt like a verdict on her fundamental worth as a person. Failure meant she was stupid, worthless, a disappointment to everyone who mattered. But Elijah had somehow created an environment where struggle was expected, mistakes were informative, and progress was more important than perfection. "Can I tell you something?" Harper said during their break. "I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life, and I don't think it's what my parents have planned." "What do they have planned?" "Business school, then joining my father's company, taking over the empire someday." Harper shook her head. "But I don't think I want an empire." "What do you want?" Harper hesitated. The answer felt too small, too simple compared to the grand ambitions her family expected. "I think I want to help people learn things, the way you helped me." Elijah was quiet for a moment, and Harper worried she'd said something foolish. But when he spoke, his voice was warm with understanding. "Teaching is one of the most important jobs in the world," he said, "but it's also one of the hardest. Are you prepared for that kind of challenge?" "I don't know. Maybe. I just know that these past few weeks, helping you clean up after our sessions, organizing your supplies, it's the first time I've felt useful, like I was contributing something worthwhile." "Miss Harper, you've been contributing something worthwhile your whole life. You just needed to learn how to see it." That afternoon, Harper found herself looking at Millbrook Academy's hallways with new eyes. She noticed the scholarship students who ate lunch alone, the kids who struggled to keep up in accelerated classes, the ones who seemed as lost and disconnected as she'd felt just a month ago. During her regular classes, she began paying attention not just to the material being taught, but to how it was being taught. She observed which methods helped students understand and which created confusion. She noticed how teacher patience affected student confidence, how small encouragements could change the entire atmosphere of a classroom. After school, she lingered in the hallway outside Elijah's supply closet, listening to him hum while he organized cleaning materials for the next day. She found herself curious about his daily routine, his perspective on the school, his observations about the students and faculty he encountered. "Mr. Elijah," she said, knocking on the doorframe, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What do you see when you watch the students here? I mean, what do you notice that the teachers might miss?" Elijah paused in his work, considering her question carefully. "I see a lot of young people carrying burdens that are too heavy for their shoulders. Some are trying to live up to impossible expectations. Others are trying to live down to very low ones. Most of them are just trying to figure out who they are in a world that keeps telling them who they should be. Do you ever want to help them the way you help me?" "Every day," Elijah admitted. "But there are boundaries, protocols. I'm the janitor. It's not my place to counsel students or offer academic help. But you're helping me," you asked. "And you needed someone who could meet you where you were, not where everyone thought you should be." Elijah resumed organizing his supplies. "Most people aren't ready for that kind of help. They want quick fixes, easy answers. Real growth requires patience most folks don't have." Harper thought about her wealthy classmates, many of whom cycled through expensive tutors and educational consultants, always searching for the perfect method that would unlock success without requiring genuine effort or self-reflection. What if there was a way to help more students, not as the janitor but as something else? Elijah looked at her curiously. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet. Just, you have so much wisdom about Learning and growing up, it seems wrong that only one person gets to benefit from it. That evening at dinner, Harper sat across from her parents at their massive dining table and tried to imagine a different kind of conversation than the ones they usually had. Instead of discussing her grades or their business concerns, what if they talked about values, dreams, the kind of person she was becoming? "Harper," her father said, looking up from his phone for the first time since they'd sat down, "Mrs. Peterson called today. She says your mathematics performance has improved significantly." "Yes," Harper replied carefully. "I found a study method that works better for me." "Good. Keep it up. I've already spoken with the admissions office at Wharton about your application timeline." Harper felt something clench in her stomach. "Dad, what if I don't want to go to business school?" Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. "What else would you do?" "I've been thinking about education. Maybe becoming a teacher." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria, Harper's mother, actually laughed. A sharp, dismissive sound. "Sweetheart, teaching is what people do when they can't do anything else," she said. "You're a Langston. You have opportunities most people can only dream." What if I dream of something different?" "Then you need to dream bigger," Marcus said firmly. "I didn't build this company so my daughter could waste her potential in some underpaid, undervalued profession." Harper felt the familiar weight of disappointment settling over the table, but this time, instead of shrinking under it, she found herself remembering Elijah's words about knowing your worth regardless of other people's opinions. "Maybe we define potential differently," she said quietly. Her parents exchanged a look, the kind of glance that said they were dealing with a phase that would hopefully pass quickly. "We'll discuss this when you're older," Marcus said, returning his attention to his phone. "Right now, focus on passing summer school." As Harper lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of her enormous bedroom, she thought about the stark contrast between her conversations with Elijah and her interactions with her family. With Elijah, she felt seen, valued, encouraged to grow into her authentic self. With her parents, she felt like a project to be managed, a legacy to be preserved, a disappointment to be corrected. She thought about Sarah's recipe box, which Elijah had mentioned during one of their sessions. He'd described how his late wife had written notes on each card, not just ingredients and instructions, but memories of when she'd made each dish, which child had requested it, what occasions had called for that particular meal. Cooking wasn't just about feeding our bodies, he'd explained. It was about feeding our souls, creating traditions, making ordinary moments feel special. Harper realized she'd never experienced anything like that in her own home. Meals were catered or prepared by staff, efficient and elegant but devoid of personal meaning. There were no family recipes passed down through generations, no stories attached to favorite dishes, no memories created through the simple act of cooking together. She wondered what it would feel like to learn to cook, not as a novelty or an amusing hobby, but as a way of caring for people, of creating warmth and connection through the most basic human need. The idea took root in her mind and grew stronger as she drifted toward sleep. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ask Elijah if he would teach her something beyond mathematics. She wanted to learn how to create the kind of nourishment that fed more than just the body. "You want me to teach you to cook?" Elijah asked, looking surprised by Harper's request the next morning. "If that's okay. I know it's not academic tutoring, but I've been thinking about what you said about your wife's recipes and how cooking was about more than just food." Harper felt suddenly self-conscious. "I've never learned to make anything from scratch. I don't even know how to boil an egg properly." Elijah's expression softened. "Miss Harper, some of the most important lessons in life happen in kitchens. If you're serious about learning, I'd be honored to teach you." That afternoon, they made their way to the school's kitchen, a professional-grade facility used for the culinary arts program. Elijah had gotten permission from the head chef to use it after hours, explaining that he was helping a student with a special project. The kitchen was intimidating with its stainless steel surfaces and industrial equipment, but Elijah guided Harper to a simple prep station where he'd laid out basic ingredients. "We'll start with something my Sarah taught our children first," he said, pulling out eggs, flour, milk, and a few other simple items. "Pancakes from scratch. That's it? Just pancakes? Miss Harper, if you can make good pancakes, you understand the basics of cooking, measuring, mixing, timing, patience. Everything else builds from there." As they worked together, Elijah talked, Harper through each step, explaining not just what to do but why. How the gluten in flour developed when mixed, why letting the batter rest made a difference, how to tell when the pan was the right temperature. "Cooking is a lot like learning mathematics," he observed as Harper flipped her first pancake. Slightly lopsided, but golden brown. "It's about understanding the principles behind the process, not just memorizing steps." Harper found herself completely absorbed in the task. There was something meditative about the simple actions. Measuring ingredients, stirring batter, watching for bubbles to form on the surface before flipping. When she tasted her first homemade pancake, she was surprised by how different it was. From the gourmet breakfast items she was used to, this was simpler but somehow more satisfying. "It tastes like it means something," she said, struggling to articulate the feeling. "That's because you put yourself into making it," Elijah explained. "When you cook for someone, including yourself, you're giving them part of your time, your attention, your care. Food made with love always tastes different." As they cleaned up their workspace, Harper found herself thinking about the difference between this simple meal preparation and the elaborate dinner parties her parents hosted. Those events were displays of wealth and status, catered affairs designed to impress rather than nourish. This was something else entirely, an act of creating rather than consuming. "Mr. Elijah, can I ask you about your wife? What was she like?" Elijah's hands stilled on the dish he was washing. She was the strongest person I ever knew, not in a loud way but in a steady way. She had this ability to find joy in ordinary moments and help other people see it too. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded envelope, worn and yellowed with age. From it, he extracted a handwritten recipe card. "This is her recipe for Sunday morning pancakes." She wrote little notes on all her cards. "See here." She wrote, "Add extra vanilla when the children are sad. Makes everything taste like a hug." Harper studied the card, touched by the faded handwriting and the evidence of love in such a simple instruction. "Do you miss her?" "Every day. But I've learned that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form. Now I love her through the way I raised our children, through the kindness I try to show others, through the recipes she taught me that I can pass on." Harper felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I don't think I've ever experienced love like that. The kind that lasts and grows and gets shared with other people." "You will," Elijah said with quiet certainty. "But first, you have to learn to give it. Love isn't something you wait to receive, it's something you practice offering to the world." Over the following weeks, their after-school cooking lessons became as important to Harper as their academic tutoring. She learned to make simple soups, basic bread, scrambled eggs that were fluffy rather than rubbery. More importantly, she learned to find satisfaction in the process of creating something nourishing with her own hands. The transformation wasn't lost on others. Mrs. Peterson commented on Harper's improved focus and confidence in class. Even her wealthy classmates began to notice that something had shifted in her demeanor. "Harper, you seem different lately," Madison observed during lunch one day. "More, I don't know, present? Like you're actually here instead of just going through the motions." Harper looked around the cafeteria at her friends, picking at expensive salads and imported bottled water, and realized Madison was right. She was more present, more engaged with her own life in a way she'd never been before. "I've been learning some new things," Harper said simply, "about myself, about what matters to me." "Like what?" Harper hesitated. How could she explain the deep, Satisfaction she'd found in learning to cook a simple meal, or the way Elijah's patient teaching had helped her discover she wasn't stupid after all. How could she describe the growing awareness that her purpose in life might be different from what her family expected? Like how to take care of myself and other people, she said finally. How to find meaning in simple things. Trevor Morrison snorted. You sound like you've been reading too much philosophy. What's next? Meditation and yoga classes. His mockery stung less than Harper expected. A month ago, she would have been embarrassed, worried about appearing unsophisticated to her peers. Now, she found herself wondering why taking care of oneself and others was considered something to ridicule. Maybe, she said calmly. Would that be a problem for you? The question caught Trevor off guard. He'd expected her to laugh off his comment, not respond seriously. You used to be more fun, Harper. Now you're all serious and deep. Maybe I was never as fun as you thought, Harper replied. Maybe I was just performing for you. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Harper found herself thinking about Trevor's observation. Had she been performing? Going through the motions of being someone she thought others expected her to be? She thought about the letter from Elijah's son that he'd shown her the week before. A thank you note written years after graduation, crediting his father's encouragement and wisdom for helping him become the doctor he'd always dreamed of being. You never pushed me to be anything specific, the letter had said. You just helped me believe I could become whoever I chose to be. That made all the difference. Harper realized she'd spent 17 years trying to become who other people wanted her to be, and had never seriously considered who she might choose to become. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, she approached the dinner conversation with her parents differently. Instead of waiting for them to ask about her grades or lecture her about her future, she decided to share something she'd discovered about herself. I've been learning to cook, she announced during a break in their discussion of market volatility. Her parents looked puzzled. Cook what? Her mother asked. Simple things. Pancakes, soup, bread. Mr. Elijah has been teaching me. Who's Mr. Elijah? Marcus demanded. Harper realized she'd never mentioned Elijah by name before. She'd spoken vaguely about finding a study, partner, but had deliberately avoided specifics about who was actually helping her improve her grades. He works at the school. He's been tutoring me in mathematics. What's his educational background? Victoria asked. Harper felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, knowing her parents wouldn't be impressed by Elijah's credentials. He doesn't have formal training, but he's an incredible teacher. He raised 3 children who all became very successful professionals. Marcus set down his fork. Harper, please tell me you're not being tutored by the janitor. The disdain in his voice made Harper's cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment, not for herself, but for Elijah, who deserved so much better than such dismissive judgment. His name is Elijah Carter, she said, lifting her chin, and he's the best teacher I've ever had. He's helped me understand more about learning and growing than anyone else in my entire education. This is unacceptable, Victoria said sharply. We're paying for the best tutors money can buy, and you're getting help from someone who actually cares, whether I learn or just memorize answers for tests, Harper interrupted. From someone who sees me as a person worth helping instead of a problem to be solved. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Harper had never spoken to her parents this way before, with such directness, such confidence in her own judgment. We'll discuss this later, Marcus said finally, when you're being more reasonable. But Harper was done being reasonable by other people's definitions. She was ready to start being authentic by her own. Harper was reviewing her notes for a history quiz when she noticed the envelope on her desk. Official Millbrook Academy letterhead addressed to her parents. It had been opened and resealed, suggesting her father had already read its contents. Curiosity, overriding propriety, Harper carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Langston, it began, it is with deep regret that I must inform you of Millbrook Academy's closure at the end of the current term due to insurmountable financial difficulties. Harper's hands began to tremble as she read. The school was drowning in debt. Enrollment had been declining for years as newer, more prestigious institutions attracted their traditional client base. The Board of Trustees had exhausted all options for financial rescue and would be ceasing operations in 3 weeks. Students would be assisted in transferring to other institutions with personal recommendations from faculty to ease the transition. The letter concluded with apologies and assurances that transcripts and records would be properly maintained during the transition period. 3 weeks. Harper stared at the words until they blurred. In 3 weeks, Millbrook Academy would close. Forever. The hallways where she'd learned to walk with confidence, the small closet classroom where she'd discovered her capacity for learning, the kitchen where she'd found joy in simple creation, all of it would disappear and Elijah would lose his job. Harper's mind raced through the implications. At 63, with no college degree and limited technical skills, how would Elijah find new employment? Who would hire a janitor his age in an economy that valued youth and credentials over wisdom and character? She thought about his 3 successful children, all building their own lives and careers. They would help their father, certainly, but Elijah had such pride in his independence, such dignity in his work. The thought of him struggling to find purpose and income at this stage of his life felt unbearable. Harper ran through the school hallways, searching for Elijah with desperate urgency. She found him in the gymnasium, methodically mopping the basketball court, with the same careful attention he brought to everything. "Mr. Elijah," she called, slightly out of breath. "Did you know about the school closing?" He paused in his work and looked at her with sad but unsurprised eyes. "Yes, Miss Harper. Got the official notification yesterday. What are you going to do?" Elijah resumed mopping, his movements steady despite what must have been tremendous anxiety about his future. "Same thing I always do when life changes. Trust that things will work out the way they're supposed to. But you're 63. It's not fair that you should have to start over because the school made bad financial decisions." "Fair's not really the point," Elijah said gently. "Life happens to all of us, rich and poor alike. The question isn't whether it's fair. The question is how you respond when it does happen." Harper felt tears burning her eyes. "I can't lose you. Not now, when I'm finally learning how to be myself. You've changed everything for me." Elijah set down his mop and walked over to where Harper stood. "Miss Harper, listen to me. What you've learned over these past weeks about your own capability, about finding meaning in simple things, about standing up for what you believe in, that doesn't disappear when circumstances change. That's yours now, forever. But I need more time. I'm not ready to do this without you." "Yes, you are. You proved that when you stood up to your parents about your dreams. You proved it when you passed that test using your own understanding instead of memorized tricks. You've been ready for longer than you realize." Harper wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Where will you go? What will you do?" "I've got some savings. I'll find something, even if it's not ideal. I've been working since I was 14. I'm not afraid of hard work or starting over." The resignation in his voice broke Harper's heart. This man who had given so much to so many people, his children, the students he'd quietly helped over the years, and now her, deserved better than uncertainty and struggle at this stage of his life. That evening at dinner, Harper looked at her parents across their expensive dining table and felt a clarity she'd never experienced before. Her father, Harper Langston, had built an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He routinely made acquisitions that cost more than Millbrook Academy's total debt. He could save the school without even noticing the expense. "I need to talk to you about something important," Harper said, interrupting their conversation about quarterly earnings. Marcus looked mildly irritated at being interrupted, but gestured for her to continue. "Millbrook Academy is closing in 3 weeks. Yes, I saw the letter. We've already begun preliminary discussions with several excellent boarding schools. Don't worry, your education won't be disrupted." "I don't want to go to another school," Harper said firmly. "I want you to save Millbrook." Victoria actually laughed. "Sweetheart, that's not how business works. You don't throw money at failing institutions out of sentimentality." "It's not sentimentality. It's about recognizing value that can't be measured in quarterly profits." Marcus set down his wineglass and studied his daughter's face. "Harper, I understand you've formed attachments to your current school, but it's not about attachments," Harper interrupted. "It's about understanding that some things matter more than financial returns. Millbrook Academy has been educating students for over a century. The teachers there actually care about learning, not just test scores and college placements. And there are people there whose lives will be destroyed if the school closes. People like your janitor friend," Victoria asked with thinly veiled disdain. "People like Elijah Carter, who raised 3 children to become a doctor, a teacher, and a lawyer while working 2 jobs and never missing a single school event. People like Mrs. Peterson, who spent 30 years helping students discover their potential. People like the cafeteria staff who remember every student's name and ask about their families." Harper paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. "Dad, you've always told me that success brings responsibility, that with great privilege comes the obligation to contribute something meaningful to the world. Here's your chance to do exactly that." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Harper could see him considering her words more seriously than she'd expected. "How much debt are we talking about?" he asked finally. The letter didn't specify exact numbers, but for someone with your resources it can't be significant. "You spent more than Millbrook's annual budget on the art collection in your office." "Harper, you can't simply throw money at every problem and expect it to disappear. Institutional change requires—" "Then don't just throw money at it," Harper said, her voice growing more confident. "Get involved. Join the board. Help them develop a sustainable financial model. Use your business expertise for something that actually improves people's lives instead of just generating more wealth you don't need." Victoria looked shocked by her daughter's directness, but Marcus seemed thoughtful rather than offended. "And what do you expect to get out of this?" he asked. "If I were to consider such an investment?" Harper realized this was the moment she'd been building toward, not just with this conversation, but with everything she'd learned over the past months. "I expect to get the chance to become someone worth your investment," she said. "Not the daughter who performs for your approval, but the person who knows her own values and has the courage to act on them." The dining room fell silent, except for the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Harper held her breath, watching her father's face for some sign of his decision. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice carried a note she'd never heard before, something that sounded almost like respect. "I'll make some calls tomorrow," he said. "No promises, but I'll look into the school's financial situation and see what might be possible." Harper felt a surge of hope so powerful it made her dizzy. Really, really. "But Harper, if I do this, if I invest in saving Millbrook Academy, I'm not doing it to rescue your janitor friend or to make you feel better about your school closing. I'm doing it because you made an argument based on principles instead of emotions. You showed me that you understand responsibility and are willing to advocate for something larger than your own comfort." As Harper lay in bed that night, she thought about how dramatically her life had changed since that first day in Elijah's makeshift classroom. She'd started as a failing student looking for academic help, but had discovered something far more valuable: her own voice, her own values, her own sense of purpose. Tomorrow, she would tell Elijah about her conversation with her father. She would see the hope return to his eyes when he learned that his job, and more importantly, his dignity, might be preserved. But more than that, she would tell him how much his faith in her had meant, how his patient teaching had helped her discover not just her capacity for learning, but her capacity for courage. The scared, lost girl who had sat in detention just a few months ago was gone, replaced by someone who was finally ready to stand up for what mattered, even when it was difficult. even when it required her to risk disappointing the people whose approval she'd spent her whole life seeking. For the first time in her 17 years, Harper Langston knew exactly who she was and what she stood for, and it felt like coming home. The next morning, Harper found Elijah in their usual classroom, but instead of math materials, he was packing his personal belongings into a cardboard box. His worn Bible, the thermos he'd used every day for 7 years, a small framed photo of his children, the simple artifacts of a working life being carefully stored away. "Mr. Elijah," Harper said softly from the doorway, "I have something to tell you." He looked up, and Harper was struck by how much older he seemed than just the day before. The weight of uncertainty, of facing unemployment at his age, had settled into the lines around his eyes. "Good morning, Miss Harper. I hope you don't mind that I'm organizing things early. Thought it might be easier to pack gradually than to wait until the last minute." "You might not need to pack anything," Harper said, stepping into the small space that had become so meaningful to her. "My father is looking into saving the school." Elijah's hand stilled on the items he was placing in the box. "Miss Harper, that's kind of you to hope for, but no, really. I talked to him last night. He's making calls today to understand the financial situation and explore options for keeping Millbrook open." For a moment, Elijah said nothing. Harper watched as hope and disbelief warred across his weathered features. "Your father would do that?" "Invest in saving a failing school. He might. I made a case for it. About responsibility. About using wealth for something meaningful." Harper paused. "But Mr. Elijah, even if he agrees to help, it won't happen automatically. The school board has to approve any financial partnership. The community has to support it. There will be meetings, presentations, probably lots of skepticism from people who think it's too late." Elijah nodded slowly, understanding the implications. "And you want to be part of making that happen?" "I want to fight for this place. For you, for the teachers who actually care about students, for everything this school could become if it had the right support." Harper felt her voice growing stronger with conviction. "But I can't do it alone. I need your help. Miss Harper, I'm just the janitor here. I don't have influence with the board or the community. You have something better than influence. You have credibility. Everyone who's worked at this school for any length of time knows you, respects you, trusts your judgment. If you stood up at a community meeting and spoke about what this place means, people would listen." Elijah was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. "What exactly are you proposing?" Harper had spent most of the night thinking through a plan, and now she laid it out with the careful logic he'd taught her to apply to mathematics problems. "First, we need to understand exactly what the school needs. Not just money, but structural changes, new programs, better community engagement. Then we need to build support among current families, alumni, faculty, and staff. We organize presentations for the school board, community meetings, maybe even media coverage to show that Millbrook is worth saving." "That's a lot of work for someone who's supposed to be focusing on her studies." Harper smiled. "You taught me that real learning happens when you care about something enough to work hard for it." "I care about this, Mr. Elijah, more than I've ever cared about anything." The pride in his eyes was unmistakable. "All right then. If your father is willing to explore this possibility, and if you're willing to do the hard work of building support, then I suppose I can help organize the effort." "Really? Miss Harper, you've given me something I didn't dare hope for, a chance to fight for something I believe in instead of just accepting what feels inevitable. How could I say no to that?" Over the following days, Harper threw herself into the campaign to save Millbrook Academy with an energy and focus she'd never applied to anything before. She spent her free periods in the library, researching successful school turnarounds, analyzing financial models, studying case histories of institutions that had been rescued from closure. She reached out to alumni through social media, crafting messages that emphasized not just nostalgia, but the ongoing value of what Millbrook represented. She interviewed teachers about their vision for the school's future, students about what they would lose if it closed, community members about the role the academy played in the local area. Mrs. Peterson became an unexpected ally, helping Harper organize student surveys and parent discussions. Even Mrs. Davidson, the guidance counselor, contributed by reaching out to graduates who had gone on to successful careers. Harper, Mrs. Peterson said during one of their planning sessions, I have to tell you, the change in you over these past months has been remarkable. Not just academically, though your grades have improved dramatically. You've found your voice, your passion. It's been inspiring to watch. Harper felt a warmth spread through her chest. Mr. Elijah taught me that learning isn't just about getting the right answers. It's about caring enough to ask the right questions. And what questions are you asking now? How do we create educational environments where every student feels valued? How do we balance tradition with innovation? How do we prove that some things are worth saving even when it's not profitable to do so? As word spread about the potential rescue effort, Harper found herself at the center of conversations she'd never imagined having. Alumni called to share memories and offer support. Local business owners asked how they could contribute. Even some of Harper's wealthy classmates, initially skeptical, began to understand the significance of what was at stake, but not everyone was supportive. At lunch one day, Trevor Morrison confronted Harper about her campaign efforts. Harper, this whole crusade of yours is getting embarrassing, he said in front of their usual group. You're making a big deal about saving a school that's obviously failed. Just accept that it's time to move on. Failed how? Harper asked calmly, though she felt her pulse quicken. Because it's having financial difficulties, or because it prioritizes learning over rankings, relationships over reputation? It's failed because it can't compete with real schools, Trevor shot back. The kind of schools that actually prepare you for success in the real world. Harper looked around the table at her friends, students who had every advantage wealth could provide, yet many of whom struggled with anxiety, depression, and a profound sense of emptiness despite their privileged circumstances. What kind of success are we talking about, Trevor? The kind where you accumulate wealth but never learn to create anything meaningful? Where you network your way into positions you're not prepared for? Where you measure your worth entirely by external achievements? Madison shifted uncomfortably. Harper, you're being a little intense. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally being honest about what I've learned matters. Harper stood up, her voice carrying further than she intended. I used to think success meant impressing people like you. Now I think it means becoming someone worth respecting, including by yourself. The tension at the table was palpable, but Harper found she didn't care about managing other people's comfort anymore. She gathered her things and walked away, feeling lighter than she had in years. That afternoon, Harper found Elijah in the school kitchen, preparing for a community meeting they'd organized for that evening. He was arranging chairs and checking the sound system. Simple tasks, but performed with the same careful attention he brought to everything. How are you feeling about tonight? He asked when he saw her. Nervous, excited, terrified. Harper laughed. I've never spoken publicly about something I cared about before. What if I mess up? What if people don't listen? Miss Harper, do you remember what I told you about learning mathematics? That the struggle is how your brain builds new pathways. Elijah straightened a row of chairs and smiled at her. Courage works the same way. You build it by doing things that scare you but matter to you. What if my father changes his mind? What if the board says no? What if we do all this work and it doesn't matter? Then we'll know we tried. We'll know we stood up for something worth fighting for, even when the outcome was uncertain. Elijah paused in his work and looked directly at Harper. Miss Harper, win or lose tonight, you've already succeeded at the most important thing. What's that? You've learned who you are when it matters. That's not something anyone can take away from you, regardless of what happens with the school. As evening approached, Harper felt her anxiety building. She'd prepared remarks, organized materials, rehearsed her key points. But standing in front of a room full of adults, Parents, teachers, community members, school board representatives felt far more intimidating than any test she'd ever taken. The meeting room gradually filled with people Harper recognized, and many she didn't. Her parents arrived and took seats in the back, her father's expression unreadable. Mrs. Peterson sat in the front row, offering an encouraging smile. Several of Harper's classmates had come, though she noticed Trevor and Madison were not among them. Most importantly, she saw Elijah's 3 children enter together: Dr. Marcus Carter, Sarah the teacher, and James the lawyer. They'd driven up from their respective cities to support their father and hear Harper's presentation. The pride and love in Elijah's eyes as he watched his family take their seats gave Harper the courage she needed. When the meeting was called to order, Harper walked to the front of the room carrying a folder full of research, surveys, and testimonials. Her heart was racing, but her voice was steady as she began to speak. "Good evening. My name is Harper Langston, and I'm a student at Millbrook Academy. 3 weeks ago, I learned that this school, our school, is closing due to financial difficulties. Tonight, I want to talk to you about why that would be a tragedy, not just for current students and staff, but for our entire community." She spoke about Millbrook's history, its unique educational philosophy, its track record of producing not just successful graduates, but thoughtful human beings. She presented data on the school's academic performance, its college placement rates, its contribution to the local economy. But most importantly, she spoke about what she'd learned at Millbrook that couldn't be measured in test scores or college acceptances. "This school taught me that failure is not the opposite of success. It's a step toward understanding. It taught me that real learning happens when someone cares enough to meet you where you are, not where they think you should be. It taught me that the most valuable lessons often come from the people you least expect to teach you." Harper's eyes found Elijah in the audience, and she felt her voice grow stronger. Millbrook Academy is more than just a school. It's a community where every person matters, where wisdom is valued regardless of its source, where students learn not just to pass tests, but to become citizens who contribute meaningfully to the world. She concluded by outlining the rescue plan she and her father had developed, a comprehensive restructuring that would address the school's financial challenges while preserving its educational mission. Marcus Langston would provide the necessary capital investment, but the success of the effort would depend on community support and board approval. When Harper finished speaking, the room was quiet for a moment before questions began. Some were practical, about finances, governance, long-term sustainability. Others were more personal, from parents worried about disruption to their children's education, from community members concerned about change. Harper answered what she could, deferred to her father on financial matters, and listened respectfully to concerns and suggestions. But the most powerful moment came when an elderly alumnus stood up to speak. "I graduated from Millbrook in 1963, he said, his voice carrying the authority of age and experience. "Back then, this school saved my life. I was a scholarship kid from a poor family, and the teachers here saw potential in me that nobody else bothered to look for. What this young lady is describing, this philosophy of meeting students where they are, that's not new. That's who Millbrook has always been at its best." He looked directly at Harper. "Miss Langston, you've reminded us of something we'd forgotten. Schools aren't just businesses that need to show profits. They're investments in human potential. Sometimes the most important investments are the ones that can't be measured in dollars." As the meeting progressed, Harper felt the mood in the room shift from skepticism to cautious optimism. People began talking about possibilities rather than problems, about what they could contribute rather than what they stood to lose. When the formal presentation ended, small groups formed throughout the room. Harper found herself surrounded by people offering help, alumni pledging financial support, local business owners suggesting partnerships, parents volunteering their professional expertise. In the midst of it all, she caught sight of Elijah talking quietly with his children. They were listening intently as he spoke, their faces reflecting the same pride and admiration Harper had come to associate with his patient wisdom. "You did good tonight," came a voice behind her. Harper turned to find her father, looking at her with an expression she'd rarely seen, something that looked like genuine respect. "Thank you for supporting this, Dad. I know it's not the kind of investment you usually make." "Harper, I've made a lot of investments over the years. Most of them have generated significant returns, but none of them have made me as proud as watching you stand up there tonight and fight for something you believe in." Marcus paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm beginning to understand that maybe I've been measuring success by the wrong metrics." As people began to leave, making plans for follow-up meetings and continued organizing efforts, Harper felt exhausted but exhilarated. She'd done something she'd never imagined possible. She'd found her voice and used it to advocate for something larger than herself. The school board would meet in 1 week to vote on the rescue proposal. The outcome was far from certain, but Harper had learned something invaluable regardless of what happened next. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to act in spite of fear when something important was at stake. She'd learned that her voice mattered, that her perspective had value, that she could contribute meaningfully to causes she cared about. Most importantly, she'd learned that the scared, failing student she'd been just a few months ago had always contained the potential for the confident, purposeful young woman she was becoming. All it had taken was someone who believed in her enough to help her believe in herself. The week leading up to the school board vote passed in a blur of activity and anxiety. Harper had organized a petition drive that collected over 500 signatures from alumni, current families, and community members supporting the rescue effort. Each signature represented a person who believed Millbrook Academy was worth saving. But Harper knew that public support didn't guarantee the board's approval. She spent her mornings attending summer classes, her afternoons coordinating with parent volunteers and alumni networks, and her evenings helping Elijah prepare materials for the board presentation. Their small closet classroom had become the unofficial headquarters for the Save Millbrook campaign. "You've barely slept this week," Elijah observed as Harper reviewed spreadsheets of financial projections, her eyes red with exhaustion. "I can't sleep until I know the outcome," she admitted. "What if we've done all this work and they still vote to close? What if the board thinks it's too risky, too complicated?" "Miss Harper, do you remember what you told that community meeting, that Millbrook taught you failure isn't the opposite of success? It's a step toward understanding?" Harper looked up from her papers, recognizing the wisdom of her own words, reflected back at her. "You're saying that even if the board votes no, we haven't failed?" "I'm saying you've already succeeded at something more important than saving a school. You've learned to fight for what you believe in. That's a lesson that will serve you for the rest of your life, regardless of what happens in that boardroom." The morning of the board meeting, Harper woke before dawn with her stomach churning. She dressed carefully, not in the designer clothes that usually filled her wardrobe, but in a simple dress that her mother had worn to business meetings. She wanted to look professional, but also authentic. Over breakfast, her father reviewed the financial proposal one final time, while her mother offered unexpected words of encouragement. "Harper, whatever happens today, I want you to know that watching you organize this effort has been enlightening," Victoria said. "I've seen a side of you that I didn't know existed, a strength and conviction that I'm honestly not sure I had at your age." The admission surprised Harper. Her mother rarely offered personal reflections, and never ones that suggested vulnerability or self-doubt. "I learned it from someone who sees potential in people even when they can't see it in themselves," Harper replied, thinking of Elijah's patient encouragement over the past months. The board meeting was held in Millbrook's main conference room, a wood-paneled space that had hosted generations of important decisions about the school's future. Harper arrived early with her parents, Elijah, and several parent volunteers who had helped organize the campaign. As board members took their seats, Harper studied their faces, trying to gauge their mood and disposition. She recognized most of them: prominent alumni, local business leaders, a retired educator, and several parents of current students. These were people who cared about Millbrook's legacy, but they were also practical individuals who understood the harsh realities of institutional finances. The meeting began with a presentation from the current headmaster, Dr. Williams, outlining the school's financial situation in stark detail. The numbers were worse than Harper had realized. Years of declining enrollment, deferred maintenance, and unsuccessful fundraising efforts had left Millbrook with debts that would be impossible to address through traditional means. Without significant intervention, Dr. Williams concluded, we have no choice but to cease operations at the end of this term. Board chairwoman, Mrs. Eleanor Richmond, a 1965 Millbrook graduate whose family had attended the school for 3 generations, called for the presentation of the rescue proposal. Marcus Langston rose and spoke with the calm authority of someone accustomed to high-stakes business negotiations. He outlined his financial commitment, enough not just to clear the school's debts, but to establish an endowment that would ensure long-term stability. He detailed governance reforms, strategic planning initiatives, and partnership opportunities with local businesses and organizations. This is not charity, he emphasized. This is an investment in an institution that has demonstrated its value over more than a century of operation. With proper management and adequate resources, Millbrook Academy can continue to provide exceptional education for generations to come. When her father finished, Mrs. Richmond looked at Harper. Miss Langston, I understand you wish to address the board as well. Harper stood on legs that felt unsteady, but her voice was clear and confident as she began to speak. Mrs. Richmond, members of the board, thank you for considering our proposal. I know that what my father has outlined makes sense from a business perspective. The numbers work, the governance structure is sound, the long-term projections are realistic. She paused, looking around the room at faces that represented decades of Millbrook history and tradition. But I want to talk to you about something that can't be captured in spreadsheets or strategic plans. I want to talk to you about what this school actually does, not just educate students, but transform lives. Harper spoke about her own experience, how she'd arrived at Millbrook as a failing student, convinced of her own inadequacy, and how the school's philosophy of meeting students where they are had allowed her to discover her true potential. The person who taught me the most wasn't a professor with advanced degrees or a tutor with impressive credentials. It was Elijah Carter, a janitor who understood that real learning happens when someone cares enough to be patient with your struggles and celebrate your progress. She saw several board members glance toward Elijah, who sat quietly in the back of the room, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Millbrook Academy doesn't just prepare students for college or careers. It prepares them to be thoughtful, caring human beings who understand that success isn't just about personal achievement, it's about contributing to something larger than yourself. Harper concluded by presenting the petition with over 500 signatures, each one representing a person who believed the school was worth saving. These signatures come from people across 5 decades of Millbrook history, alumni who credit this school with shaping their values, parents who want their children to experience the same transformative education, community members who understand that some institutions are too valuable to lose to financial pressures. When Harper finished speaking, Mrs. Richmond thanked her and opened the floor for board discussion. What followed was an intense 45-minute debate about financial risks, educational philosophy, governance structures, and community responsibility. Some board members expressed concerns about the unprecedented nature of the arrangement, a private family essentially rescuing an entire institution. Others worried about setting expectations that couldn't be sustained long-term. But Harper was encouraged by the thoughtful nature of the questions and comments. These weren't people looking for excuses to reject the proposal. They were wrestling seriously with a complex decision that would affect hundreds of lives and a century-old institution. The most powerful moment came when James Carter, Elijah's lawyer son, requested permission to address the board. "Mrs. Richmond, I'm not a Millbrook alumnus, but I am the son of someone who has worked at this school for 7 years. I want to speak briefly about what this institution represents to families like mine." James spoke eloquently about the values his father had instilled in him and his siblings, the importance of education, the dignity of honest work, the responsibility to help others reach their potential. "My father may be the janitor at this school, but he embodies everything Millbrook Academy claims to represent. He believes in the potential of every student, regardless of their background or current circumstances. He understands that education isn't just about transmitting information. It's about transforming lives. James looked directly at Harper. "Miss Langston's proposal isn't just about saving a school. It's about preserving a place where people like my father can continue to make the kind of difference that changes students' entire trajectories." After the formal presentations concluded, the board retired for private deliberation. Harper and her supporters were asked to wait in the hallway. While the decision was made, the waiting was agonizing. Harper paced the marble floors where she'd once walked as a failing, lost student, now filled with purpose and conviction, but uncertain whether her efforts would be enough to save the place that had given her so much. Elijah sat calmly on a bench, reading his worn Bible, his expression peaceful despite the significance of what was being decided just a few rooms away. His 3 children sat nearby, occasionally speaking in quiet tones but mostly just being present to support their father, Marcus. And Victoria Langston stood near the windows, talking in low voices about contingency plans and alternative arrangements. But Harper noticed her father glancing frequently in her direction, his expression reflecting something she'd rarely seen from him: uncertainty about an outcome that mattered deeply to someone he loved, after what felt like hours but was probably only 90 minutes. Mrs. Richmond emerged from the conference room and asked everyone to return for the board's decision. Harper's heart pounded as she took her seat, trying to read the expressions of the board members for some hint of their conclusion. But their faces revealed nothing. The practiced neutrality of people who had made difficult decisions before and understood the weight of their responsibilities. Mrs. Richmond stood at the head of the table, a single sheet of paper in her hands, containing the words that would determine the future of Millbrook Academy and everyone who depended on it. "After extensive deliberation," she began, her voice carrying the gravity of the moment, "the Millbrook Academy Board of Trustees has reached a decision regarding the rescue proposal presented by the Langston family." Mrs. Richmond's pause seemed to stretch for eternity. Harper held her breath, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Beside her, her father sat with the composed stillness of someone accustomed to high stakes. Moments, but Harper could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. "The board recognizes the unprecedented nature of this proposal," Mrs. Richmond continued, "and the extraordinary commitment it represents from the Langston family. We also acknowledge the remarkable demonstration of community support that Miss Harper Langston has organized over the past weeks." Harper's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to read Mrs. Richmond's expression, but the woman's face remained carefully neutral. "However, we also understand the tremendous responsibility we bear, not just to current students and families, but to the 134-year legacy of educational excellence that defines Millbrook Academy." The word, however, landed like a stone in Harper's stomach. She felt the beginning of tears burn behind her eyes, the crushing weight of failure settling on her chest. After careful consideration of all factors, financial, educational, and ethical, the Millbrook Academy Board of Trustees votes to accept the Langston family rescue proposal. For a moment, Harper wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. The words seemed to hang in the air, disconnected from reality. Then the meaning crashed over her like a wave. They'd said yes. They'd voted to save the school. The room erupted in quiet celebration, applause, tears, embraces between people who had worked tirelessly to make this moment possible. Harper felt her father's strong hand on her shoulder, her mother's rare smile, the warmth of victory earned through genuine effort and conviction. But her eyes immediately sought Elijah across the room. He was sitting perfectly still, his weathered hands folded over his Bible, tears streaming down his face. Not tears of sadness, but of profound relief and gratitude. His job was safe, his dignity was preserved. The place where he'd found purpose for 7 years would continue to exist. Mrs. Richmond wasn't finished. The board also wishes to announce several additional decisions that will take effect with the implementation of the rescue plan. She looked directly at Elijah. Mr. Elijah Carter, your dedication to this institution and your positive impact on students has not gone unnoticed. Effective immediately, you are being promoted to the position of Student Life Coordinator with responsibilities for mentoring programs and community outreach. Harper gasped. A promotion, not just a job saved, but recognition of Elijah's true gifts, his capacity to guide and inspire young people. She watched as his children surrounded him, embracing their father with pride and joy that matched her own. Furthermore, Mrs. Richmond continued, the board recognizes that institutional change of this magnitude requires fresh perspectives and strong leadership. We are pleased to announce that Dr. Sarah Carter has accepted our offer to join Millbrook, Academy as Assistant Headmaster for Academic Affairs. Elijah's daughter Sarah, the teacher he'd raised with such care and sacrifice, would be coming home to help lead the school where her father worked. The symmetry was beautiful, the recognition of merit over connections profound. But Mrs. Richmond wasn't done with her announcements. Finally, the board wishes to acknowledge the exceptional leadership demonstrated by Miss Harper Langston throughout this process. Harper, your maturity, dedication, and vision have been inspiring to witness. We hope you will consider serving as our first student board representative, a position we are creating to ensure student voices are heard in future governance decisions. Harper felt dizzy with surprise and honor. She'd started this effort simply hoping to save Elijah's job, but had somehow become a recognized leader in the school's transformation. Thank you, she managed to say, her voice barely steady. I'd be honored to serve in that capacity. As the formal meeting concluded and people began to gather in small groups to celebrate and plan next steps, Harper found herself swept into conversations about timelines, transition plans, and the exciting possibilities that lay ahead. Marcus Langston was deep in discussion with Dr. Williams about governance structures and financial oversight. Victoria was talking with other parents about fundraising strategies and community engagement. The energy in the room was electric, the feeling of people who had come together to achieve something truly meaningful. But eventually, Harper managed to extract herself from the celebrations and make her way to where Elijah stood with his children. They were talking quietly, their voices filled with emotion and gratitude. "Mr. Elijah," Harper said softly, "congratulations on your promotion. You deserve it more than anyone." Elijah's smile was radiant. "Miss Harper, I don't have words for what you've done. Not just for me, but for this whole school, this whole community." "I learned from the best teacher I've ever had," Harper replied. "Everything I did using principles you taught me. Patience, persistence, caring about something bigger than myself." Dr. Marcus Carter, Elijah's eldest son, stepped forward and extended his hand to Harper. "Miss Langston, I want you to know what this means to our family. My father has given his whole life to helping others, often without recognition or appreciation. What you've done, fighting for this school, making sure his contributions were valued, it means everything to us." Harper shook his hand, feeling the weight of gratitude from people whose respect she'd actually earned. "Your father changed my life. Saving his job was the least I could do. It was much more than that. said Sarah Carter, soon to be Dr. Sarah Carter, assistant headmaster. "You organized a community, built consensus, presented a compelling case for institutional transformation. Those are advanced leadership skills that many adults never develop." James Carter, the lawyer, nodded in agreement. "Harper, you've shown that young people can be powerful advocates for change when they care deeply about something. That's a lesson this community won't forget." As the evening progressed and the celebration continued, Harper found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a failing student, convinced of her own inadequacy, trapped in a life that felt hollow despite its material advantages. Tonight, she was a recognized leader who had helped save an institution, preserve jobs, and create opportunities for future students to experience the same transformative education that had changed her life. But more than any external achievement, Harper realized she'd accomplished something far more valuable. She discovered who she truly was beneath the expectations and assumptions that had constrained her for 17 years. She was someone who could learn, could lead, could fight for what mattered. She was someone whose voice had value, whose perspective could contribute to important decisions, whose efforts could make a real difference in the world. As the celebration wound down and people began to leave, making plans for the exciting work ahead, Harper walked through the hallways of Millbrook Academy one more time. These corridors where she'd once shuffled in confusion and shame now felt like pathways to possibility. Tomorrow, she would begin preparing for her new role as student, board representative, working with administrators and faculty to ensure student perspectives were heard in governance decisions. She would continue her academic studies, but now with the confidence that came from understanding her own capacity for learning. She would help Elijah transition to his new position as student life coordinator, supporting his efforts to create mentoring programs that could help other struggling students discover their potential. And she would start planning for a future that looked nothing like what her parents had originally envisioned, but everything like what she'd learned to envision for herself. The scared, lost girl who had sat in detention just months ago was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that her worth wasn't determined by other people's expectations, but by her own choices, values, and actions. Harper Langston had finally become someone she could respect, and that felt like the greatest victory of all. 6 months later, Harper stood at the podium in Millbrook Academy's newly renovated auditorium, looking out at the faces of graduating seniors, their families and faculty members gathered for commencement ceremonies. As the school's first student, board representative, she had been asked to deliver remarks on behalf of the student body. Her cap and gown felt different from the expensive designer clothes she'd once worn to feel important. This outfit represented something earned rather than inherited, academic achievement based on genuine understanding, leadership roles accepted through merit rather than family connections. "Members of the class of 2025, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. 6 months ago, this ceremony almost didn't happen. Millbrook Academy was scheduled to close, its doors shut forever on 134 years of educational tradition." Harper paused, letting her eyes find Elijah Carter in the audience. He sat in the front row with other administrators, wearing a suit instead of his janitor's uniform, his new title of Student Life Coordinator, reflecting the recognition his wisdom had always deserved. Beside him sat his daughter, Sarah, now Dr. Sarah Carter, whose leadership as assistant headmaster had already begun transforming the school's academic programs. But sometimes, when institutions face their darkest moments, they discover their brightest possibilities. Sometimes crisis becomes opportunity, and endings become beginnings. Harper had written these words herself, drawing on lessons learned through months of struggle, growth, and discovery. No expensive consultant had crafted her message, no ghostwriter had polished her thoughts. These were her own reflections, earned through experience and grounded in authentic transformation. I want to talk today about what I've learned about real education, not just the kind that prepares you for tests and college applications, but the kind that prepares you to become the person you're meant to be. She spoke about the difference between performing for others' approval and discovering your own authentic voice, about the courage required to advocate for values that might not be popular or profitable, about the profound satisfaction that comes from contributing to something larger than your own success. The most important lesson I learned at Millbrook didn't come from a textbook or a formal curriculum. It came from understanding that everyone, regardless of their title, background, or circumstances, has wisdom to offer if we're humble enough to listen. Harper's eyes found her parents in the audience. Marcus and Victoria Langston sat with expressions of pride that felt different from the approval she'd once desperately sought. This wasn't pride in her performance of their expectations, but recognition of her growth into someone with her own values and convictions. The financial investment her father had made in Millbrook Academy had proven successful by every measure. Enrollment was increasing, academic programs were expanding, and the school's reputation was stronger than it had been in decades. But Harper knew the real return on investment wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in lives changed, potential realized, and communities strengthened. As we leave Millbrook Academy today, Harper continued, we take with us not just knowledge and credentials, but an understanding of what education can be when it values each person's individual journey toward becoming their authentic self. She concluded her remarks by announcing the establishment of the Carter Mentorship Program, a new initiative that would pair struggling students with patient mentors who understood that real learning happens through relationship, encouragement, and the belief that everyone deserves someone who sees their potential. This program honors Elijah Carter, whose wisdom, patience, and care transformed not just my own educational experience, but our entire understanding of what it means to help young people discover their capabilities. The applause that followed was warm and sustained. Harper watched as Elijah wiped tears from his eyes, overwhelmed by the recognition and by seeing his philosophy of patient, caring education formalized into a program that would help countless future students. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photographs and celebration, Harper found herself surrounded by classmates, teachers, and parents who wanted to congratulate her on her speech and thank her for her role in saving the school. But the conversation that meant the most took place in the small closet that had served as their first classroom, where Elijah was packing up materials from the mentorship program's inaugural session. "Well, Miss Harper," he said, looking up from organizing tutoring supplies, "how does it feel to be graduating as valedictorian?" Harper laughed. "Terrifying and wonderful at the same time. A year ago, I was convinced I was too stupid to learn anything. Now I'm heading to Columbia to study education policy. Not business school? Definitely not business school. I want to understand how to create educational environments where every student feels valued, where learning happens through relationship and encouragement rather than pressure and competition." Elijah nodded approvingly. "Your parents are okay with that choice? They're learning to be proud of who I actually am, instead of disappointed in who I'm not." Harper paused, considering how much her relationship with her family had evolved. It turns out that when you stop performing for other people's approval, they sometimes start appreciating your authentic self. And what does your authentic self want to do with all this education? Harper had given this question considerable thought over the past months. "I want to help create schools where kids like I was, the ones who learn differently, who need patience and encouragement, can discover their potential instead of being labeled as failures." "That's important work," Elijah said simply. "The world needs people who understand that every child has gifts worth nurturing." As Harper prepared to leave Millbrook Academy for the final time as a student, she walked through the hallways one last time, remembering the scared, confused girl who had once shuffled through these same corridors, feeling worthless and invisible. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own value, who had found her voice and learned to use it for meaningful purposes, who approached challenges with confidence rather than fear. She stopped at the detention room where she'd first been introduced to the idea that sometimes the richest children are the poorest of all. Now she understood that wealth wasn't about what you accumulated, but about what you contributed. Richness wasn't measured in possessions, but in relationships, purpose, and the positive impact you made on other people's lives. Outside, her parents waited by the car that would take them home for a celebration dinner, but this time, the conversation wouldn't be about grades or college rankings or future earning potential. It would be about values, dreams, and the kind of person Harper was becoming. Marcus Langston had learned to be proud of a daughter who chose service over profit, meaning over status. Victoria had discovered that her child's happiness mattered more than her achievements. Both parents were still learning, still growing, still figuring out how to love authentically rather than conditionally. As the car pulled away from Millbrook Academy, Harper looked back at the brick buildings and manicured grounds that had witnessed her transformation from failure to success, from performer to authentic self, from lost child to purposeful young adult. But she also looked forward, toward college, toward a career in education policy, toward a life dedicated to helping other struggling students discover that they were worth the patient work of real learning. She thought about the high school diploma in her bag, earned through honest effort and marked by Elijah's proud signature as a witness to her journey. It represented not just academic achievement, but something far more valuable, the knowledge that she was capable of becoming whoever she chose to be. The scared girl who had once sat alone in detention, convinced of her own inadequacy, had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the person who saves you is the one you never thought to notice. And sometimes the greatest education happens not in classrooms, but in the relationships that help you discover who you're meant to become. Harper Langston was ready to begin the next chapter of her story, confident in her own worth and committed to helping others discover theirs. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of success that could never be inherited, only earned through the patient work of becoming authentically yourself, and that felt like the richest inheritance of all.